evening, everyone, and warmest welcome to this webinar in recognition of the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. Unfortunately, due to technical difficulties, we were unable to stream this webinar on the 25th of November, but instead have worked diligently to present it to you tonight. I would like to commence by respectfully acknowledging the Gadigal people of the UNAA Nation, the traditional custodians of this land. We pay our respects to the elders, past, present, and to all descendants who have cared for this place since creation. We also honour all other Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who are joining us this evening. My name is Dr. Patricia Jenkins, President of the United Nations Association of Australia and New South Wales, Vice President of the UNAA National, and former Vice Chair of UN Women in Sydney. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you this evening at a time when we face unprecedented challenges. The impact of COVID-19 has affected us as a global community. Nonetheless, Affinity has continued with their events online. The first of these programs began in the month of Ramadan, with over 27 daily episodes of Ramadan conversations with facilitator, former ABC veteran broadcaster John Cleary and TV presenter George Donegan, as well as other distinguished co-hosts, guests and musicians, joining both nationally and internationally. Over the last 6 months, Affinity has also successfully presented 20 webinars in collaboration with 23 institutions with more than 30,000 views. Let's join together and have a look at the highlights video.
I think as the leader of a government
with the United States is the US
featuring Muslim and Christians
that enhance social cohesion.
Peace operations and peace building provide hope to areas that are emerging from conflict.
What are the factors that contribute?
Trying to solve common problems.
Talk about a Human Rights Act, we tend to
must be reserved.
For those who have never attended an Affinity event before,
Affinity was formed some 20 years ago
by a group of young Muslim Australians
to promote multiculturalism and foster intercultural
and interfaith dialogue by building bridges between different groups in society.
So the warnings have been in since 1988. It's science.
Will help build the resilience of our environment to climate change.
Vulnerable parties need a court system that's flexible, accessible and adequately resourced.
And if we don't save each other and work together to save creation, then it'll all be destroyed.
Activating positive peace is generally community level.
To help make sure that every person that doesn't have a voice in this equation,
imams and other religious and faith leaders
get access to the key services that are available to them.
Generally looked upon to give advice and support.
Even if we doubled the humanitarian intake in Australia.
To all speak up about the deterioration of human rights.
In the world at the moment, you see
there's still so many displaced.
Where leadership is strong and you see where leadership's not strong and you look at the difference it makes on society.
There's a realization that the place for youth
what is impacting on decreasing,
and it is a privileged space,
peacefulness globally is attitudes.
Still a very good opportunity for you to grow as a person.
And use that positive peace frame and think about what you can do.
There is no space for hate. There is no space for bigotry. There is no space for racism.
You are wonderful citizens which are contributing to the well-being of our state.
A, in your own community.
And the example you are setting.
B, in your own family unit.
Make sure that all of us stay safe and we keep our loved ones safe.
Or see what you can do personally.
You're an example to the rest of the world about what multiculturalism means and how we can all be successful.
I have a responsibility to them.
This is the most extraordinary public health challenge.
As well as to everyone else, not just to my family.
That we have faced in 100 years.
Economic, social and cultural rights are also very important.
Especially this year, it's really an opportunity where we're all in the same storm. We might be in different boats.
These conversations are so important to promote the concept of togetherness, cross-cultural collaboration, and of breaking down barriers that might otherwise, but should never, exist.
Really putting yourself out there in the university spaces.
That we can't use ethnicity or race
and utilising the online spaces that are provided for you.
Or religion as anchor points to be able to divide us.
Positive peace is an indication of a capacity of a country to be peaceful.
Well, there is an economic need for why we need to have a CEO who is Indian or Chinese.
There's only limited time in the day to be able to study and balance these other things.
But there is a moral case of saying, why not?
Crucial for your professional development.
Actually, that's a really good point. 100% a contributing factor to the success.
And just being more respectful of each other would avoid a lot of these problems.
We're yet to see culturally diverse representation at senior levels.
They're amazing, absolutely amazing. More of these insightful webinar episodes are available to watch on Affinity's YouTube page, and all are welcome to view. Tonight's webinar episode is in collaboration with UNAA New South Wales, Law Council of Australia and Affinity. And may I say, it's always a pleasure to engage with cousin Ahmet Pollitt, Affinity's dynamic executive director, and whose genuine commitment is touching. Like Affinity, UNAA New South Wales and the Law Council of Australia promote community harmony and social cohesion in one of the most culturally diverse states in the world. It is also timely that we've been able to come together this evening and help raise awareness about one of the most devastating human rights violations in the world today. I personally believe it would make a significant difference if more people stood behind that landmark document, the legendary Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in which it is stated, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Without further ado, it is now my pleasure to introduce tonight's facilitator, Ms. Jamelle Wells. Jamelle is an ABC television and radio newsreader and the senior court reporter for New South Wales. Jamelle has covered some of Australia's highest profile cases, including ICAT inquiries, the Gordon Wood, Kelly Lane and Jeffrey Gillum murder trials, as well Australia's longest running terrorism trial and the church sex abuse inquiries. She's also author of The Court Reporter and ABC book. Welcome, Jamelle.
Thank you, Dr. Patricia, for your introduction, and welcome everyone. Violence against women and girls is one of the most widespread, persistent and devastating human rights violations and form of discrimination. Unfortunately, it remains as one of the largely most unreported violations in our world. Tonight, we'll be discussing the significance in recognition of International Women's Day with Tasneem Chopra OAM and Pauline Wright. Cross-cultural consultant Tasneem addresses issues of diversity, equity and inclusion across organisational leadership, including intersectionality within government, corporate and community sectors. For her efforts in cultural competence and community engagement, she was acknowledged with an OAM in 2020. This follows her being named an anti-racism champion by the Australian Human Rights Commission in 2019. Pauline is President of the Law Council of Australia and a partner principal of PJ Donnellan and Company Solicitors on the New South Wales Central Coast. Pauline was President of the New South Wales Council for Civil Liberties in 2018, only the second woman to have held that role. She was the Council's Vice President since 1998 and has been active, especially in the areas of criminal justice, anti-terrorism and asylum seeker policy. Before her presidency of the Law Society of New South Wales in 2017, Pauline had served on the Council of the Law Society of New South Wales since 1997. She also sits on a number of committees and working groups of the Law Council of Australia, including the Access to Justice Committee, the Equal Opportunity Committee and the National Criminal Law Committee. Welcome, Tasneem and Pauline. So we'll begin tonight by asking each of our esteemed speakers to share and reflect on the significance of International Women's Day, the most important aspects of it to you. I might start with Tasneem. What are your thoughts on this?
Thank you. Thank you, Jamelle. Thank you, Pauline. First of all, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land upon where we're gathering, wherever you might be watching this webinar, and in particular pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. On this issue of family violence, violence against women, gender-based discrimination, I mean, there's many iterations of the same thing, which is the marginalisation and the muting and the silencing and the controlling of women in all in all their forms, ending, of course, with the most vicious form of death. So this is a huge issue. In Australia, we've seen it only escalate in spite of the intention that's been drawn about being a pervasive threat to our safety, with almost more than one woman dying per week, literally at the hands of either an intimate partner or someone known to them. So we're very much living with what some journalists have labelled this like intimate terrorism. Right? It is a present reality that doesn't seem and attract the response from leadership that it probably could if it were terrorism of another sort. And I say that knowing how much money deployed against the broader terror threat in this country compared with the threat to safety and well-being. So the numbers are there, the evidence is there that it's not attracting the same interest, and yet the fatalities and number of Australians who have died as a result of this in the last 12 months far outweighs significantly the threat to the wider Australian public from any other form of terrorism. So yeah, it's a reality that we live with. And when I ask myself, and I think many viewers would ask themselves the same questions, why do the lives of Australian women somehow, unfortunately, seem to be of less value when it comes to actually demonstrating political will to change things? I think that's a question for leadership. I really do think it is. We have had inquiry after inquiry, recommendations that have not been taken up. The service providers and experts in the sector know what needs to be done. They know where resources need to occur, and there's always a nodding of the head. There's the thoughts and the prayers, and there's every time there's another fatality, there's this this is a dreadful, terrible thing. It should never have happened, and it shouldn't. But when we talk about trying to respond to it systemically, there are ways it can be done. Whether it's supporting grassroots, whether it's changing the kind of culture that we have in a country that allows, to a large extent, accepted misogyny to occur in the ranks of either leadership or government or business or media. There are so many ways of tackling it. They're just not being taken up with true integrity. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Tasneem. Pauline, what are your thoughts on the significance of the day?
Thank you, Jamelle. I'm joining you from Darkinjung country here on the central coast of New South Wales. I echo much of what Tasneem has said. She is absolutely right. The culture of misogyny is at the core of violence against women and children. There is a pervasive sense from a deep cultural sense that women are not as equal as other humans, namely men. Women are seen as the possessions of their husbands, their fathers, and if they step out of line, there is still a sense that women deserve to be disciplined and to be subject to the power of the man of the household. So there is that old, persistent cultural norm, and it applies to children too. So this is why we see persistently men perpetrating violence against women in the home and children in the home. That's not to say that women don't perpetrate violence too, but it is far less common, and it tends to be of a different kind. It tends to often be in self-defense rather than the aggressor in a situation. So this International Day that was on the 25th of November is a time that we should be reflecting on what the causes are of sexualised violence, of gendered violence. And I think that we need to go back to that that cultural set of norms that enables that view of women as being somehow less human than men, and subject to the power of men. So might is right, is the norm we need to battle, because physical power of men has always enabled them to control women. It's been said that the thing that men fear the most from women is being laughed at. The thing that women fear the most from men is being killed. So those are my preliminary thoughts. Thanks, Jamelle.
Thanks, Paula. Joining us tonight is Nicole Checkett to recount her experiences that reflect on the importance of the day. And Nicole is a 30-year-old single mother of one from Melbourne. She's working as a registered nurse in general practice, as well as the alcohol and other drug field. She's always had a passion for helping people and prides herself on being compassionate and open-minded. Nicole's achievements have come through her perseverance and her inner strength, and she credits the qualities as coming from the solid and loving support that she has around her. She believes in making the most of opportunities, and that the most important things in life are quality time, family and music. Welcome, Nicole. Can I get you to share your story with us?
Thank you so much for having me on the program. I would like to first begin by starting in a different way than most might think. I received a phone call from the police about a month now. They contacted me with the intention of getting further statements to do with things that happened around my perpetrator from about 4 years ago now. This brought up a lot of things for me, obviously having to and also divulge into all of those memories that I, had kind of already coped with and I'd already done sessions around and, kind of put aside. I mean, trauma stays with you forever. If anybody tells you that trauma can be cured, they're wrong. It's a matter of, it's more of about coping with that trauma rather than curing it or forgetting about it. Yeah. So
thank you for sharing that, Nicole. We want to hear more.
So I had about 3 incidents which I had to report to police, and I chose to report to police at the time that it actually happened. And yeah, obviously there was more surrounding that, and that's what the contact call was about. But I guess I'm here sharing my stories of the questions to follow, and I'd like to go more into that a little bit later.
Okay. Has the system failed you in some way?
Yeah, so I'll tell you a bit more about that. So the very first time that I called police in relation to my perpetrator, they arrested him. He threw a TV room and put a few holes in the walls, and they took him into custody. They didn't actually look back at his history because he had only been released from prison like a short time beforehand, and of course he told me a story which wasn't the truth. So I was under a different impression, and he was actually on a CCO for family violence, and he was actually on parole for family violence. So the police actually released him back into the community, and what followed that was a series of events that could have easily been avoided if he had have been taken back into prison like he should have been. So the next event, obviously he apologised for what he did, and they're very good at that. They're very good at apologising. They're very good at telling you that they're going to do better. They're very good at making you believe like it's your fault. So this then led to me forgiving him. This then led to further incidents. He eventually held me hostage overnight in my own home. This was it's hard to talk about, so bear with me. I was strangled. I was thrown to the floor. I had a bedside table thrown at me. I remember 3 times trying to exit my front door, and he just wouldn't let me, and he'd grab me in some way, and I had to wait for him to actually fall asleep to exit my own so that I could seek safety. And I ran to my neighbour's house, and my neighbour helped me call the police. They called the police, and the police arrived. 2 divvy vans parked at the front of my neighbour's house, which was visible from the room where he fell asleep in. And 4 police came in to take my statement. And I remember sitting there, like bruised and battered and distressed, telling them about what had happened that night. And I remember stopping about 20 minutes into the statement and saying, are you going to go over there and get him? And my neighbour said the same thing. And they just stood there and said, oh, we're just going to stand here. We're just going to take your statement. So I continued to tell them what had happened, and they took my statement, and I said, you know, the minute they see your divvy vans outside, like the minute that the minute that he sees them outside, he's going to run. And they still just stood there and didn't do anything. It took a good solid half an hour longer, and they eventually decided to go over to my house and try and get him, to arrest him, and he was already gone. So that obviously led to several months of trying to find him, and several months of further manipulation by him toward me, involving me. And he came back into my life again because they're really good at doing that, as I said before. And the final time that I can recall where I felt very failed by the system was I was punched in the head 28 times, and I drove myself to a nearby hospital. I was telling the hospital staff, and then they got the police involved, and the police said, you need to make a statement. So I did that. I then gave him the key to my house to go and arrest him because I knew that he was still there because he had passed out because he was affected by alcohol. And they came back half an hour later to say that they could not get into my house. And I was like, okay, well, I'm not sure how much further access I could give you. I did give you the key. So they went back after I, told them further information on how to get into my house, and then they came back again and, sorry, but he's actually fled, and there's lots of damage in your house, and yeah, so that was disappointing, and yeah, that was, that's kind of, I feel, where they failed me in the duty of care. I'm not sure what happened exactly on that night. I can't speak for them, but I definitely felt like they failed me on those 3 occasions. And I felt like I could have done better.
How should it have looked, Nicole? What did you want police to do when you called them?
I wanted them to follow through on what they stand for, which is protecting the community and protecting the safety of the community, because that's what they sign up for. That's what they do when they get into that career. They sign up to protect people, and they have a duty of care for protecting people. And I think that they did not respond quick enough, and I think that, the prompting from me and the prompting from neighbour should have been enough for them to walk over to my house and go and arrest him. But I think that they were scared. But that's what they've got the tools, they've got pepper spray, they've got guns, they're supposed to have their education behind them to be able to manage these complex situations, which I understand are very complex.
Pauline, I'm going to bring you in here. Is what Nicole is now something that's quite common in the response to domestic violence? As a lawyer, you see this a lot?
Yes, Jamelle, I do see that a lot. It's an extraordinary situation where police do have the equipment, they do have the training, they should have all the power at their disposal, and the way that Nicole has described the situation just displays a lack of preparedness to take the action that they could have taken. On that first instance, if the perpetrator had been charged with a new offence, then no doubt he would have been taken back into custody because he was on parole in the community after release from jail on a family violence offence. If he is charged with and convicted with another offence of the same kind while he's on parole, he would have been taken back to jail. And Nicole would then not have to have faced everything that followed from that horrific assault where she was punched 28 times, a further event where her house was trashed. She would not have been subject to any of that had those proper steps been taken. So we need to look at why it is that police don't take those necessary steps when they can and when they should. Sometimes it's out of a misplaced sense of giving somebody a fair go or another chance, but that's not, in these situations, that is not what they should be doing. Where a woman has been held hostage in her home, they should be taking every step to protect that woman and her child from further violence, and it's not good enough. So we need better training. There's no need for more powers. The powers are there. It's all about the culture and the training.
Okay. Tasneem, I'll bring you in here. Is this the experience that you hear about when you talk to other women who are victims of domestic violence?
Look, I think it's the experience of women survivors in the sector who, like Nicole, they do have, initially want to have faith in the system, but can be brutally let down, not for their own action. They've actually done the right thing. And Nicole, I just want to thank you, Nicole, for your bravery and for sharing what you've gone through. I think I can't imagine how difficult it is, but I know it's an important story for us to listen to and to perhaps be motivated by to do something. And I think, if your comments can change even one woman's life, session, that's amazing. So thank you for that. I also want to speak to the issue of training. And so I know I can't speak for other states, but I know that in some states, the training that police undergo through before they graduate from the academy is something in the realm of, say, 36. Okay, so that's almost, it's 2/3 of a year roughly. But within that course of training, which is I think 18 weeks of intense training, the amount of time that they have designated to dealing with the issue of family violence, which I will admit is one of a raft of areas of police response that they have to attend to. But we also happen to know is one of the busiest and most overwhelmingly demanding areas of where police spend their time. The amount of time they actually spend in training on this issue is abysmally low. Okay, so I think from recent statistics, I recall that police in Australia violence issue every 6 minutes. Okay, so I don't know what they do per day, but it's a lot of cases. And if this is the reality of what they're dealing with, they need to be trained accordingly to be able to have response, understand that this family violence incident occurred outside the home. It would be out and out assault and would attract a very different response, presumably either from the police and it should be the same response, because assault is attack and violations are just that, whether they're home or out, and they need to have that same level of responsiveness and not be seen as a domestic, which unfortunately seems to be a culture that still lingers in the mindset of certain people, which it has to be tested and taken into account. So there's that issue. And the other issue I want to speak to is I'm pretty on the family violence impacting culturally and linguistically diverse communities in Melbourne's outer north. It's part of a broader research piece that's in the region. It follows the suicide of about 6 women in the space of 12 months in the same area, and a corresponding report into those deaths found there to be a strong evidence base of family violence that led to the suicide of these women. So the question now that stakeholders and service providers are asking is, how did we get to this point? Has the families in these communities so under the radar that they had no place to go, another option to go to? And I bring this up, I look at Nicole, and she has agency, the ability to speak to her mind and come forward and give us some very useful information about how things went wrong. And I think about the number of women who are represented the family violence sector, who have that capacity, and what they're going through, and what the use of the police response must be for them if they don't have the articulation of being able to have a conversation for language issues, for example, or cultural issues, for example. And speaking to some police personnel on this issue in that region, they told me something really disturbing, which was the number of police officers graduating from the academy who arrive in that particular region. They'll work there for 3 to 4 years. They'll be dealing with family violence because that's the reality of the work they're doing as police in the region. Once they've been there for 3 to 4 years, and once they find the skill set and the base and the ability to be more discerning, the right response, because there's no, there's no, what's the word? There's no better experienced trainer than actually feeling with kids. Instead of staying on in that particular region, they move out. They move out because there's no remuneration, there's no incentive to stay in a particular area where you've built skill set and you've gotten the ability to work in family violence cases. And he said what actually almost traditionally happens, like textbook, is police will develop the skills, will be there for a few years, and then after 4 years, they get the option to move to an area where it's not as busy and cases aren't as high, and maybe it's a region, and they're getting the same pay, right? So they opt in, it's like clockwork, they opt out. And what that means is a brand new come in. And so you're getting these newly untrained, almost freshmen entering the force, dealing with high intensity family violence issues, who can take a few years to finally get up to speed and understanding the best bond. And as soon as those skills they've out. So the reason I bring this up is, to me, it was a glaring anomaly in the system. If you incentivize police officers to remain where they are by remunerating them for the work that they're doing, which is valuable, and they stay on, and what kind of knowledge, experience, and integrity they're going to bring to the cases that what you've gone through, because they know, they've seen it, they know how to deal with it, they see the signs, they see the trends, they know what they know the responsible thing to do. I hope I make sense of that, but to me it was a systemic failure that could probably be addressed with the right funding and right attitude.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Tasneem, thank you. Thank you. And Nicole, for sharing your inspiring story. That's been through is horrific. Thank you for sharing it with us. We've now got a short video message from Rosemary Kariuki. Rosemary is the Multicultural Community Liaison Officer for Parramatta Police and the Wales State Recipient Local Hero 2021.
Domestic and family violence is a pattern of abusive behaviors when one person exerts power, pain, control, and causes fear over another person. It happens in intimate relationships, a family dynamic, and carer relationships, or people sharing accommodation. It is predominantly gender-based, as women are mostly the victims of abuse. Remember, it can and does happen in all cultures and all communities, English and non-English speaking communities. Religious beliefs or cultural practices are not excuses of violence. The individual who commits violence is responsible. It is never the victim's fault. If you are in immediate danger, call 000. That is 000. If you or someone you know is experiencing violence or abuse, you can call the Domestic Violence Hotline on 1800 65 64 63. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. Pauline, I might go back to you now. There's a proposed family court merger. Do you think this is going to make the problems with Australia's handling of domestic violence better or worse?
Look, I don't think that it will make it. It's a flawed proposal. It fails to prioritise the well-being of families and children, and it ignores credible expert input into what a better model might look like. What it proposes to do is, in fact, collapse the present world-acclaimed standalone specialist family court into a generalist court, Federal Circuit Court. It will, in effect, abolish the family court as we know it. And that's going to only be to the harm of vulnerable children and families in need of specialist family lawyers. Because Family Court of Australia does include a whole suite of services that are designed to support the system, including counsellors, mediators and registrars, as well as specialist judges. The Family Circuit Court has never done that and cannot do that. The problem with the system as it is at the moment is that it's under-resourced. That's why it's failing women in victims of domestic violence, failing children, is because it's under-resourced. We haven't got the specialist counsellors in sufficient numbers. We haven't got the mediators. We haven't got the judges available to do all necessary. That would see family law matters brought into a generalist court that does migration matters, tax matters, all sorts of bankruptcy and liquidation issues at the same time as family law is not the way forward. And it's an unacceptable gamble with the lives of Australian children and families. I think we really need to reform the family law system. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But the reform should be based on sound policy and proof, and not on idea of somehow abolishing an expensive court. We need to put more resources into a very good system that, if it was sufficiently resourced with enough judges, would work. It would work. We've seen it work in Western Australia. The model there sees the family court over there dealing with all family law matters, and it can deal with state-based domestic violence allegations without there needing to be multiple points of entry and difficult procedural issues that people have to surmount, which is what's happened in the rest of Australia, where we've got this mix of the family court and the federal circuit court. So the Law Council really opposes this proposed merger that the government has forward, and thankfully at this point it hasn't gone through the Senate, and we're hoping that the senators will reject it early in the new year when it's brought back to us. It's not the answer. The real answer is get more counsellors, more media, more interpreters, fund the system that was a gold standard system as proposed, which has been weakened by successive governments under us.
Okay. Tasneem, what do you think it would take for leaders to recognise the threat of violence against women, for the intimate terrorism that we sometimes describe it as? It's killed more Australians in the last decade than any act of political terror.
No, it's that. I mean, I think it's self-evident from what you just said, Jamelle. The numbers speak for themselves. The data is there, but there's no political will to act it. The amount of money that they've allocated towards spend on family violence issues and family safety is abysmally low compared with the money that they're throwing at other aspects, development in this country through the last budget. So whether it was economic development, which is all important, but I mean, even the military deployment of troops, the amount of expense that's being contributed towards the armament of this country, that's all exponential and high. But when you look at the well-being of a country, and you look at the resource of the people and their lives and their livelihoods, somehow it doesn't seem to track the same amount of interest. They don't seem to see the dollar value in preserving the well-being. And I think I always compare New Zealand and the model they have for governance there, and I look at an entire government department dedicated to well-being in New Zealand, because they recognise that what's the point in developing a country if you don't have, if you don't have a populace that's functioning, a populace that's safe, it's able to contribute safety and to live in safety and to thrive in safety. So they seem to have got the model right. Now, whether it's the fact that we have a woman leading New Zealand, one might speculate could be a contributing factor. But I do feel that overwhelmingly the leadership here seems to lack an adequate sense of urgency when it comes to how desperate the situation is. And unless and until somehow they're personally affected by a crisis, we don't seem to be getting any traction. So I think the singles are important. I think Nicole's story that she's sharing is so valuable. I think Rosie Batty and her legacy is that Australians will remember forever. Australian of the Year, it was a great accolade. But in terms of what Rosie stood for and the recommendations that were made through inquiries that she was a part of have fallen on deaf ears. They're not being implemented. What does it take? And that is actually that I would actually like to ask government. What would it take for you to fund this issue the way it needs to be, the way that sector experts have done that it be? What would it take for you to implement the recommendations, and what is the resistance in doing it? Because I think that shouldn't be a question that the sector, which is already underfunded and burdened with in having to deal with crises, should also have to then examine. What do they need to do? They're already working under budget, under-resourced, overwhelmed with clients. COVID has seen caseloads triple in many cases because of the intensity of families escalating in a closed environment. But funding hasn't responded. So what does it take for them, and I say those who have the capacity to fund it, what would it take for them to put their money where their mouth is and actually make the necessary changes and make the necessary recommendations and commit to actually doing what needs to be done? Because it's not happening. I don't have the answer. If anyone else does, I'd be happy to hear what they're saying.
Yeah, good point. We learned from last month's budget announcement that funding directed counter-terrorism initiatives around $670 million compared to $150 million to combat violence against women. So, as you say, where is the political will there? One of the problems, we've touched on it a little bit, but is that some cultures are structured in a way where women are silenced and not expected to speak out in public. How do we get around that? Pauline, I might throw this one at you. We, in a lot of, Australia has many different cultures and a lot of groups, women just do not speak up. So how do we get to the bottom of this problem?
I think that it's a really difficult question. It comes down being culturally appropriate information being made available with access to interpreters for all the common languages on a locality by locality basis, being freely available. Services that specifically cater for people of culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds are just essential to ensure that women, no matter from what background, feel safe making complaints and feel that they can do it in an environment that doesn't expose them to violence or stigmatization. It's a very tricky problem, but it's not something that hasn't been looked at. Again, we've done a lot of work to look at these problems, but there hasn't been the funding and the political will to put them into place. I'm sure Tasneem might have some reflections on that same issue.
Tasneem, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much what Pauline you have covered it. I do feel that we don't have a shortage of skill set and capacity in people that can advise government on the best recourse to take. We've had meetings, we've had people have made personal interventions with their local MPs. Even there've been letters, there've been petitions, there've been campaigns, the white ribbon. There's no shortage of this being a global issue that requires attention. The Me Too movement was catapulted into into our lounge rooms because the reality, the culture underpinning the way that women are mistreated in the world has become a daily reality. So how you begin to unpack that, whether it's through education programs in schools, whether it's these respectful relationships initiatives that have taken different iterations, there are formats, they need to be attended to, but it does little good for children in education settings to learn about how we must value each other and respect each other and understand boundaries, understand consent, when they watch our leaders themselves involved in issues of behaviour, bullying of co-workers in Parliament, and the mistreatment of women in the way that we speak to them, in the way that we demean them, in a media empire that's intent on belittling women and marginalising them. There's just so much to unpack. So I think while it's a momentous sort of beast to contend with, I think the starting points are with, yes, education, and B, funding to services who can actually do the hard work of protecting women. But and I always say this to myself in the sector that I work in, how depressing it is, and what a reality it is that so much of our day-to-day work, of our initiatives, and the millions of dollars that we deploy in the work that we do, whether it's writing or frontline assistance, is all triggered because of men's violence. I mean, that's the bottom line cost here. Men behaving badly is costing this country millions of dollars, and is costing us lives. It's almost like we sort of circumvent this issue of like, we need to protect women, and we need services, and we need education. It's like, if men just weren't violent and aggressive and abusive and territorial and misogynistic, have this issue. That's probably my aspirational little pipe dream there, but yeah, it's always a sort of, I wouldn't say it's a humbling reality, it's a very depressing reality that I turn to regularly when I think of all the work I'm doing. It's like, gosh, I would be so happy to not have to do that. I'll be so happy to take on another vocation if we did not have violence against women.
Tasneem, thank you. And after those great insights, Pauline and Tasneem, I think it's time we hear from some of our virtual audience tonight.
Jamelle, just while while the technology is catching up with us, one thing I think is worthy of mentioning is First Nation and the high rates of domestic violence within Aboriginal communities. And I'm often asked, well, what's the cause of that? There's a real correlation between families with complex needs and those facing domestic violence and other legal issues that take them to court. And families in First Nations communities have faced intergenerational trauma, the stolen generation experiences consequent on colonisation, and these factors all increase the likelihood of stresses within family groupings. And I think addressing these factors has to be the key to improving the ability of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander families to access justice and other supports where family violence occurs. And I think if we start looking at the problems from their causes, we start to look at preventing violence from ever occurring in the first place and addressing those causal causes. It's essential, though, whatever happens, any decision-making about potential solutions is led by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women. From the experience with justice reinvestment, that community-led preventative approaches do work. They have driven down violence against women in those communities where justice reinvestment has been. I know many women from within First Nations communities, including Dr. Hannah Maid in Western Australia, have been advocating for decades for essential services, including legal services, as well as housing and health services for Aboriginal women victims. And they've taken that up with several UN treaty bodies. And it's been recommended that the Australian government adopt a specific national action plan on violence to Indigenous women. As yet, as we've seen across the board, government hasn't listened. There hasn't been that political will to make change. We know what needs to be done. It happened.
Thank you. I'm not sure if we are going to go to our virtual audience tonight because of a few technical issues, but thank you for your wonderful insights, Tasneem and Pauline. And to end the night, I'd like to call on Affinity's Executive Director, Ahmet, to present some concluding remarks if the technology lets us cross to Ahmet. If not, we'll keep talking.
Thank you, Cousin Jamelle. And good evening, distinguished viewers, my newly extended families, uncles, aunties, cousins. Tonight, we are gathered once again in recognition of the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Women. We come together to stand up and speak out against violence against women. Here tonight, our distinguished speakers have reflected on what individuals and societies can do about violence and make change as a peaceful society. I'd like to thank and acknowledge our supporting partners, UNAA New South Wales and the Law Council Australia for their efforts, not only for tonight, but by actively assisting to eliminate all forms of violence against all women and girls. To the advocates, activists, service providers who are on the front lines of trying to eliminate this global cause, I would like to sincerely thank them for the work they do. Their advocacy benefits all of our society because an attack on women's rights is a threat to all of our human rights. I'd like to sincerely thank our inspiring and empowering leaders, activists, and role models of tonight, my cousins Pauline and Tasneem. I'd also like to thank Nicole for sharing your inspiring story, which is important for our society. Thank you, Jamelle, for facilitating significant webinar, and my esteemed cousin, Dr. Patricia, for the warm welcome. Finally, thank you to my cousins, Dr. Fiona and Matthew, for their contributions in tonight's webinar. Unfortunately, women have been deprived of their rights throughout history around the world. Despite considerable achievements of women and regarding the rights of women worldwide, we continue to witness ongoing news of violence against women today. Like all forms of violence, violence against women is the expression of unhealthy mindset and psychology and is simply unacceptable. We must not approach the matter solely from a disciplinary perspective, but get to the root causes and come up with long-lasting solutions. At the societal and institutional level, the effort to eliminate violence against women must include an educational strategy starting early in the lives of children as a long-lasting solution. This way, I believe we can hope to continuously improve the status of women in the coming generations. The protection and advancement of women's rights in the right to live, study, and work in safety is an integral part of advancing universal human rights. Alongside of the government's enforcement measures, civic and religious leaders, intellectuals, and non-governmental organizations must lead efforts to raise consciousness on the importance of women's rights and prevention of violence against them. On the occasion of this day, I urge everyone to take a strong stand to protect the rights of women and prevent forms of violence against them. I pray we will live in a world in which everybody, especially women who are champions of compassion, is respected for their inherent value and treated with dignity and justice. Affinity, we will continue to raise these women's voice and in the hopes that all together we will succeed into culture and ending violence against women forever. Distinguished viewers, we have come to the end of the final webinar for the year 2020. As my esteemed cousins Patricia mentioned, Affinity has presented to you 50 distinguished webinars, and I would like to sincerely thank our distinguished speakers and esteemed institutions, especially our viewers, for supporting and encouraging our webinars. AIM, our main drive and motivation are to promote and live peace through sharing universal human values, embracing and loving all of humanity, and continuing to build friendship bridges virtually and physically. I hope to host you all in the year 2021 with new innovative ideas and events, and continue to walk together on the path of positive global peace. It wishes you all a COVID-safe, a wonderful social holiday season. See you next year. Thank you.